Is it technically a motoring topic? It's not, because it's not a topic about actually driving, is it? It's a topic about what you are driving and why and the politics of it. It's not a motoring topic. It's not like, how many miles do you get to the gallon, or what's better, a dual carriageway or I don't know. What's the difference between an A road and a B road? It's not a motoring topic. It's a political topic. So shut up. It's not a motoring topic at all. I don't do motoring topics. If I do, I almost always regret it within 10 seconds of the first caller ringing into the programme. So it's definitely not a motoring topic. But it is, and this is the thing, well, this is the reason why we're doing it now. It is interesting to me. I am finding it interesting. I suffer sometimes from what might be described as overthinking-itis. And I sometimes find myself thinking, because there are so few people in the British media with a decent-sized platform who haven't spent the last 13 years tickling the toes of Tories. It's pretty much every single newspaper, bar the Mirror and the Guardian. It's pretty much every broadcast platform, bar none, except us, really. The BBC isn't allowed to express an opinion. In fact, so right-wing is the media that the BBC ends up, in some people's boiled brains, looking left-wing simply because it's impartial. And now there's new outlets springing up all over the place that are sort of born of the view that the pitch isn't quite biased enough in the UK. We need more programmes presented by Tory politicians which nobody else is allowed to contribute to. So, it is absolutely bonkers. And because of that, I think sometimes we suffer from... what's the opposite of Stockholm Syndrome? What's the opposite of being so surrounded by a certain ideology that you end up falling for it? Whatever the opposite of that is. I suppose it's possibly a slight... I don't like to think of myself as a sufferer from a condition that I invented. But it could be a small case of footballification going on here. Because I look at who lines up on one side of an argument sometimes. And I think, well, the opposite must be true. So if you think that, the people that said Boris Johnson was an honourable man, Boris Johnson was a good man, Boris Johnson was a decent man, the people who said that Boris Johnson was not a morally depraved, sexually incontinent, pathological liar. That's not an opinion, by the way, now. That's just counting. The people who said that are on one side of an argument. Which side are you going to go? People who said Brexit would make food cheaper, bring down the cost of living, make trade easier, get rid of red tape, free up £350 million a week for the NHS, cheap shoes for peasants. People on that side of it. So they're all on that side of an argument. What side are you going to go on, now that you know what it's really all about? What are you going to do there? People who called... There's a bloke in the Telegraph who called Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget the best budget he'd seen in his life. He currently edits a national newspaper. And he's very, very certain that what Rishi Sunak did with net zero was genius. So what side of the argument are you going on? So over there, you've got Liz Truss was a genius, Boris Johnson was a good man, and Brexit was a brilliant idea. All of those people. And just think for a minute. I know this is one of my favourite drums. But think for a minute of how many people with prominent platforms in the British media, despite being right about Truss, right about Johnson and right about Brexit, you can now name. Go on, have a go. Just name. And I don't mean a Twitter account or a podcast. It has to be a daily platform akin to a newspaper from which you can think of people who have been proved right about Brexit, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. How many can you name? Go on, have a go. Oh, that's very kind. But no, not including me. Go on. I'll wait, shall I? Isn't that incredible? We need a tumbleweed sound effect, Keith, I think, for effect at this point. Isn't that... do you ever stop to wonder how that has happened? I mention this, of course, in part because Rupert Murdoch supposedly stepped down from the head of his media empire yesterday and did an absolutely crushing blow to the elites. He was whining about the elites in his resignation statement to colleagues and then gave the whole shebang to his own son. Nothing says anti-elite like handing it all over to your own son. That's the son that's still in the business, not the one that walked away in protest at Rupert Murdoch's support for climate deniers and sundry other egregious liars, up to and including at the time Donald Trump. So, I mean, does it ever worry you that there is a very, very short list of people in prominent positions in the UK media who are just right about stuff, as opposed to so completely bent by bias or by fetishization of wealth? You must never underestimate how many of these pungent pundits are just weak at the knees for rich people. It's incredible to witness. You may even have witnessed it on occasion yourself. Oh, here's someone who runs a company. My goodness, they must really understand everything from the ontological question to the cure for the common cold. Here's someone who runs a company and said that Brexit was going to be better for their business, and it's actually been much worse. Oh, sorry, that's Rocco Forte. It's mad, right? And yet it is so completely normal now in this country that you kind of find yourself, perhaps lazily and perhaps incorrectly, looking at what they're doing and thinking you've got to do the opposite. So Richard Littlejohn, I don't know whether he's filing from Florida again or whether he's in Britain at the moment, but he's certainly spent a significant part of his career commenting on the state of the United Kingdom from his beach house in America. And why not? Because, who needs to actually be living in a country to comment on it? He has pointed out today that the net zero squabble is very similar to the Brexit squabble. And I think, in the spirit of stopped clocks, twice a day, I think he was actually right. And it gave me pause because I found myself thinking, gosh, he's right. I mean, he, bless him, won't realise that in many ways pointing out that an argument is similar to Brexit after Brexit has done the polar opposite of what its proponents and supporters said it would do is probably not quite the zinger that you might think it is. It'll go down well with Daily Mail readers. But actually it made me stop and think, do you know what? Maybe he's right. Maybe my sort of amused opposition, I said to you yesterday, I know it's a really serious subject, but I just found myself thinking, have you allowed yourself to base your opinion on sort of tribal loyalties? Because there's nothing tribal about the planet or the environment, but Rishi Sunak backtracking on something important, being so of a piece with what has gone before, but you don't actually understand the issue as well as you should do. And I'll tell you why I'm saying that. And I don't know if you're aware of this. I don't know quite how it works if you're a Tory cheerleader. I don't know what being a client journalist is like. I don't know whether you get phone calls or you go out for lunches with sort of, senior members of the Downing Street setup. And if Keir Starmer wins the next election, I can tell you for sure that I won't be having lunch with anybody or hanging out with any senior Labour people or indeed interacting with them outside of a professional environment. I think it is an absolutely appalling betrayal of my listeners to be in the pocket or even in the phone of senior Tories or senior Tory advisors. My friends, they will never be. But how does it work? Do you get told, we've got to go all in on net zero because everything else is going so badly? We've got to go all in on net zero to distract attention away from, the concrete in the schools or the shocking amounts of sewage in our rivers. We've got to go all in on net zero because interest rates are still incredibly high, even though they've come down a bit. We've got to go all in. So do they send out bulletins? Do they send out instructions? Is there an APB? We've got to go all in because they've flipping gone for it. It's mad. And I think that's why I immediately reached for my baseball bat and started swinging back at the net zero announcement. And then yesterday, after coming off air, I started looking at it in a little bit more detail. And I'm not sure it's a very big deal. 12 minutes after 10 is the time. For these reasons, right? Manufacturers were told yesterday by the government that by 2030, 80% of all the vehicles they need to sell will have to be electric, right? That's 80%. The big brouhaha politically is that it won't be 100%, but it will be 100% by 2035. So what we have is a 5-year pause on the last 20% of new car sales. In fact, if they don't sell a certain percentage of electric cars from their overall roster, they will actually be fined. There are going to be fines in place. So if you're a motor manufacturer and the percentage of cars that you sell that are electric doesn't hit, I think it's 22% next year, and then it rises incrementally until 2030, you're actually going to be fined. So the punishments are in place. All they seem to have done is delay the point at which that final 20% will be removed from the forecourts, as it were. And if I was a manufacturer, I don't think I'd change my plans according to what Rishi Sunak has announced. If I was changing my production lines to accommodate the fact that we're going to have to be all electric by 2030, and we're still going to have to be 80% electric by 2030, I don't know that I'd leave the petrol production line running. And the cars that I imagine are going to catch or fall into this category are the ones that you've already built but haven't sold yet. So that's not an opinion, that's counting. That's been reported in the Daily Telegraph today. The idea that this 100% electric car rule is really, really big, I just don't think it's true. Now, the reason I was joking around a bit at the outset with regard to motoring issues is because it's not an Achilles heel, because I'm quite open about it. I don't know much about cars. I don't particularly enjoy driving when I have to do it. I've ever told you why I learnt to drive? I learnt to drive because Mrs. O'Brien was pregnant and understandably reluctant to drive herself to the hospital in the event of going into labour and her waters breaking. So, to be fair, I had a 9-month window in which to learn to drive, and I found a lovely bloke in Islington called Noel who specialised in intensive driving courses, and he got me over the line in about six weeks flat. Passed first time, never developed an enthusiasm for it, don't particularly enjoy it, will never understand the fetishisation, the emotion. I'm not criticising it anymore. I got that wrong earlier in the week. I get excited about cranes. Show me a lovely crane, I can sit staring at it for 10 minutes. So if you love cars, that's fantastic. But I don't have that gene. I don't have that. I also like bridges. Does anyone else like bridges? There's something about a bridge that speaks to something inside me. I don't know what, but there we are. And for you, it's cars, and that's fine. And I'm not criticising you anymore. It's a bit childish to do that. Criticise enthusiasms you don't understand. It's a bit childish. But it's possible I've missed something. That's why I'm saying this. I'm normally pretty good on detail. It's possible I'm not good on this detail. But if 80% of cars by 2030 are going to have to be electric. New cars. No one's taking your car away. That's another part of the politics that I think is deliberately being used to mislead you. Oddly, by exactly the same people who completely misled you about Brexit. Isn't that odd? Exactly the same people told you Brexit was going to make you better off, or reduce the cost of your food, or improve the quality of the NHS, or even if you're a bit racist, massively reduce immigration. All of those people who told you that, and it's now done the exact opposite, are telling you that this net zero story is a really big deal. It's a very big deal. What if it isn't? What if it isn't? How can it be that big a deal if all that we've seen is a shift of 20% of new cars that would have to be electric in 2030 will instead have to be electric by 2035. Those are the facts. And it's fully electric. So it's not, as I understand it, and again, I think my confusion, rather than being a professional embarrassment, can be used as an illustration of how confused the issue is. But I think the new cars will have to be electric. Not even hybrid or self-charging, because the drive is towards zero emissions, right? And if it's got a bit of petrol, then it's not a zero emission. I've tried to absolutely nail that down, but I haven't necessarily fully succeeded. We're pretty confident that's the rule, but it doesn't matter, because you won't need to buy a new car until you need to buy a new car. And the market in second-hand cars will remain in place. The deadline for full zero emissions is 2050. So are you listening to this going, really? But surely, James, given the amount of jumping up and down and shouting from the rooftops that the usual suspects have been doing in the client media and the government, I thought this was a really, really big deal. I thought that this was some sort of massive moratorium or a huge break upon change. Why are all these people that told me Brexit was a brilliant idea and routinely tickled Boris Johnson's tummy on a regular basis, why are they all telling me that the net zero pronouncements made by Rishi Sunak this week are a massive, massive deal? Well, you'd have to ask them. So 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. There are two questions here, and they're really linked. I don't think you can answer one without answering the other. The first question is, are you right? Am I right? I mean, is this actually not a very big deal at all? 0345 6060973. And I think it's fair to say that to answer that question, you will need a slightly better grasp of the facts than the average bear, but not an obviously expert grasp. If those numbers are right, and they are, by the way, 80% by 2030, with penalties in place if it doesn't happen. You can even buy credits off other car companies. So if you're not selling enough and another company has sold more, you can buy those credits off those car companies. And if you don't hit the target, you get fined £15,000 per car by the government. Right? It's always in the detail. Imagine if people in this line of work had been giving you all the detail about European Union membership before 2016 instead of wanging on about immigrants and bendy bananas. So those are the facts as I understand them, which means it's not a very big deal. Which leads me to my second question, which is, why is Rishi Sunak doing it? Now, you can, of course, call me and tell me from either perspective, either a supporter or a detractor, that this is actually a very big deal, James, in which case you don't need to answer the second question, but you'd be welcome to. But it's taken me 48 hours. I apologise for that, but, nobody's perfect. It's taken me 48 hours to come to what I would call a comfortably informed position on this. It's changed a little bit in the last 24 because of this news or this reassurance given yesterday to the motoring industry that the 80% requirement for new car sales will still be in place in 2030. It leads me to conclude that this is not a very big deal at all. 0345 6060 973 is the number. In which case, the second question becomes inevitably, why is he doing it? And also, why are all the usual suspects getting so excited about it if it's actually more of a whimper than a bang? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 23 minutes after 10. I'm definitely not going mad. I mean, it is out there. Front pages galore and all the usual suspects, all the sort of Brexity, boiled brain Boris fans jumping up and down, even though Boris Johnson, oddly, is opposed to what Rishi Sunak has done. All the people, I don't suppose you can expect intellectual or moral consistency from Boris Johnson fans. But all the front pages, go Rishi, yes, woo, net zero, blah, blah, wee. And then tucked away on page 5 of the Daily Telegraph today, just 4 or 5 paragraphs at the bottom of the page. 4 in every 5 vehicles sold must be electric by the end of the decade, ministers have told car bosses, despite Rishi Sunak's decision to delay a ban on new petrol sales. So it's a 20% moratorium. Anyway, I've given you the details. They are correct. Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, is understood to have told companies building the charging points that the government is pressing ahead with the so-called zero-emission vehicle mandate. 22% of cars sold by manufacturers from next year will need to be electric, and it goes up every year. So, well, I've asked you, is this really a big deal? And if it's not, why is he doing it? Daniel's in Leeds. Daniel, what do you reckon?
I think it's a culture war. Like, it's got to the point now where they know they're going to lose the election. So it's what can we do?
Just now? Back up quickly. Just back up briefly, because you've skipped the first question. I think I know what your answer to the first question would be, but is this a big deal at all?
I don't think it is. I mean, it's 5 years. Knocking it back 5 years down.
For 20%. 5 years for 20%. If it was a 5-year delay for all of it, I could understand some of the coverage, but it's a 5-year delay for a fifth of it, which just seems to me to be pretty close to negligible.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just think it's all to do with, there's so many points down in the polls now, and it's just looking like, what can we do to get everyone arguing again and get people voting for us? And it's been the same with everyone before. As soon as they're on the back foot,
So why does this work as a culture war? Because as I understand it, it only works as a culture war if people don't actually understand what's going on, but believe things that are not happening and have been suitably spooked by them, which of course brings us back to Brexit.
I think it's a lot to do with Just Stop Oil now. And
Right.
you're seeing these people sat in the streets, and the local public are coming in. There's so many videos come up on my YouTube feed about people actually grabbing people and throwing them out of the road.
Right.
And then I've also seen articles about how Labour have funded, or Labour donors have also donated to Just Stop Oil. And I think they've thought, right, this is the next
just
thing
trying
we
to
can
turn cars into a culture war.
Yeah.
And as with all culture wars, the facts don't matter. It's all about the feelings.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of them, people feel so strongly about it on both sides, because you've got the younger generation that really do want to, have a better future, not have to worry about this climate change scenario. And then you've also got your people who love Top Gear. And
when you say that, one of the people I rely on for guidance on these matters is actually Quentin Wilson on Twitter, a former presenter of Top Gear, and he's a passionate advocate of electric vehicles, often dismantling the attempts. In fact, yesterday he was dismantling the utter bilge that was being spouted on television by a Conservative MP. So I like that, Daniel. I mean, normally I balk slightly at use of the phrase culture war because it leads us into such sort of grey and evidence-free areas, but this seems to fit, actually. If the cap fits, wear it. And a text came in as you spoke. It says, in the greater scheme of things, Sunak's U-turn isn't as big as being made out. But if you're a Tory or one of their courtiers, then it's all you've got. It's a huge deal. It looks that way to me. I suspect that all of the people perhaps jumping up and down and setting off the party poppers earlier in the week weren't aware that by the end of the week, the Transport Secretary would be telling the companies building charging points that actually we're pressing ahead with the 2030 deadline for 80% of new cars. We've just delayed for 5 years the final 20%. In other words, yesterday I said, who will be celebrating this? Today I'm tempted to ask, what are they actually celebrating? Thank you, Daniel. Take care. Barbara's in Havant. Barbara, what would you like to say?
Oh, well, yes, I discovered the zero emissions vehicle mandate yesterday evening while I was doing a bit of research, and it's absolutely true.
Same here,
and
Barbara.
I thought, oh, what's going on here?
That's exactly what I thought.
Had they scrapped that, you might think it was a bit more convincing,
Precisely.
but they haven't, for very good reasons, because they know very well that the automotive industry is well into gearing up for producing electrical cars. I mean, apart from anything else, economies of scale will mean that if they're only producing, if they are even producing new diesel petrol cars, they'll be incredibly expensive because they will be like a special item, not an item that's
That's
sort
correct.
of
There'll be
produced.
exemptions, won't they? That's what they'll be.
Yes.
Yes.
And as to why they're doing it, well, I think they have read the runes at ULEZ. For me, they've read them incorrectly, because although they won, they actually lost 10, I think,
this is in Uxbridge and Ruislip, yes.
Yeah, and I think they're trying to appeal to drivers everywhere. And of course, with everything, they make these announcements. And when you look into the detail, most of the stuff that they come up with is you cannot implement it. This is true of Rwanda.
Yes, that's true.
People in detention who are facing removal from this country are allowed access to legal help. They won't be able to get any because there are not enough immigration lawyers in the country to deal with the number of people that are likely
You're describing a theme. I'm going to steer you back to the topic under discussion. But you're correct to point out similarities between policy built upon provoking feelings devoid of facts.
Of fact, when you look into it, there's either it's not a big deal, it was announced 5 years ago by some previous government, or when you look at the detail, most of these policies cannot be implemented. And I mean, the sad thing is that the facts don't get through to the extent that they should to make people come down from their initial reaction. Oh, that's marvellous.
Yes, well, that's who I'm quite interested in talking to today. I people who were jumping up and down with joy earlier in the week. How you're responding to the news that actually it's nowhere near as big a deal as all your sort of favourite mouthpieces told you that it was. Thank you, Barbara. I love how our minds worked in the same way last night. I thought, there's got to be a bit more to this than meets the eye. And then as you read into it and discovered that the ZEV, as it's called, mandate is still there, you sort of thought, well, what's everyone getting so excited about? And then, I don't know whether Barbara did this, but then I had my penny drop moment. I went, oh, God, it's all the blooming gammon again. It's all the, well, not the gammon themselves, but the sort of the gammon feeders. So all the gammon feeders are getting excited about it. All the people that used to sort of tickle Boris Johnson's toes on a regular basis, or the people who said that you've got to vote Brexit. Brexit's going to be great. It's going to bring down immigration and bring down the cost of it. All these idiots, frankly, let's be kind, who remain in positions of enormous prominence, both in politics and the media, they're the ones getting excited about this. So at that point you go, possibly they're either not understanding what it is they're getting excited about, or they're lying to their listeners and readers and voters again. And I wouldn't like to choose whether it's just an absence of understanding of the issue, just because you're too arrogant or too unconcerned to dig into the detail and work out what's actually going on. You've had your orders. We're going in. We'll go away, go soon. Or you're doing it dishonestly, and you know that it's all nonsense, but you're going to crack on with it anyway, because as quite a few texters are pointing out, the alternative is to talk about anything else that this government is currently presiding over. It is 10:35, and there's no pleasure in this because we're not big enough to make much of a difference to the conversation, but it looks as if the whole electric vehicle brouhaha, the net zero pronouncements this week, were designed to appeal to people who don't understand the facts, because nothing that substantive seems to be changing. 80% of new cars will still have to be electric by 2030, and the remaining 20% will have to be electric by 2035. So everyone is having a party based on 20% of new car sales. And, of course, nobody, and I think this is part of the misinformation and the deliberate attempts to mislead as well, nobody is going to have to buy a new car until they need a new car. Andy goes further. He says there's a real irony here, James. Most Brexiters seem to have missed it. Johnson, or his advisors, selected 2030 to stop production of petrol cars because it puts us 5 years ahead of most of the EU and would therefore encourage manufacturers to set up shop here to build their electric cars. It could have been a sort of Brexit benefit. It also allowed him to claim we were beating them. We're going further and faster than the EU. And Rishi Sunak has responded by saying, oh, no, we need to align ourselves with the EU on this, although, of course, he didn't put it like that. So that you can see why my questions are, can't you? Is this actually a big deal? And if not, which seems pretty close to certain, why has he done it? Peter's in Beaconsfield. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hi.
Hey.
So I'm actually a socialist, so it hurts me to say this, but I do kind of agree with the principle of what Rishi Sunak is saying in terms of electric cars. So I work in the science industry, and there's masses of research being done right now on next generation car battery technologies that are going to be, half the price, half the weight, 5 times, 10 times the range.
As you'd expect, it's like, what's that rule about? Yeah. It's usually about chips, isn't it? Is that rule that one of the Microsoft founders made?
Yeah, but the difference is, I drive a normal petrol car, and I would not, even though I could afford it, I would not buy an electric car for at least 10 more years.
Okay.
Because if you buy a petrol car, then every year, every 4 or 5 years, things change a little bit. The tech gets a little bit better. There's a bit more efficiency. There's a bit more power. There's a little bit faster. But the thing with battery cars, electric cars, I think it's very risky to buy it today, because you're going to get in 2 or 3 years a big a little, not a small change,
an exponential leap in technology,
a quantum level difference, and the car companies I'll probably get shot for saying this, but the car companies will never tell you that, in 3, 4, 5 years, there's going to be a car that's
it's the same with the phone. It's the same with the phone manufacturers, to be fair. I mean, it goes with any big purchase. And
I think phones,
obviously it's not as expensive.
But But with batteries, it's a massive multi-trillion-dollar industry.
But this means, hang on, I understand all of the points you've made perfectly, and they're very pertinent. But but I push you towards the question of whether or not this is a big deal, because your reservations are not really assuaged. In fact, the opposite. You would probably say that having a requirement of 80% of cars, new cars, to be electric by 2030 is suboptimal as well, because of the Moore's law is the one I was talking about.
I think so. I think you'd have to be nuts to buy. I mean, I look at people and I think it's crazy to buy an electric car. I mean, they depreciate so much after 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Have a look online and see how much a 5-year-old Tesla is worth. Nobody wants them.
Life's too short, Peter.
Yeah. Well,
if I was in the market for a 5-year-old Tesla, so why has he done it then? If it's not really a big deal, and in fact you've gone further and said he's not fixed the problem that you believe exists, why is A, he doing it, and B, the client media jumping up and down with such excitement?
Well, it's making great headlines,
Yes, but that's not a question. I just said, why is it making great headlines?
Well, I think there's a cohort of society which might be conservative voters who hate the idea of being forced to do things and change.
But you know that they're not being forced to do things.
Well, it's the same as the stop the boats thing. I mean, that's really not going. None of the things that have been proposed by either party are going to work.
You just got to shout really loud that you are going to make life difficult for these people.
Exactly. I mean, it's a great vote winner to say these things.
It's not actually. I'm sorry. I'm being very pedantic with you today. The polling show it's not a great vote winner. The Tories are absolutely lost at the moment, and they never shut up about the boats. And most of the polling shows that the net zero stuff's not going to touch the sides, except to consolidate the vote of the people that you've just described, who could be loosely typified as people who fell for all the nonsense about Brexit and Boris Johnson. So, you look up the word gullible in the dictionary and there's a picture of them.
Fair enough. But then, the society we live in and how things have changed post-Trump is decisions are made on a whim, on small facts that are not important, and no one looks at the bigger picture anymore.
No, sorry, you carry on.
That whole line that, who made that up? Did Trump make it up? Alternative facts.
Yeah, it was Kellyanne Conway while she was working as his press officer.
Yeah, all right. One of those. Yeah. So alternative facts. That's what matters, and people. And when it comes to the election, the coming election, it could be swung on simple things that people thought about or were told the day before.
Of course, it could. I mean, these are always the dangers. That's why we often describe the Labour Party's current position as carrying a Ming vase across an ice rink. You can't take anything for granted, and things can go wrong. But in terms of that's the word I'm looking for, the sort of the mechanics of what Sunak is doing, it's beyond cynical, really, because he very much casts himself as a departure from what went before in terms of competence with regards to Liz Truss, and in terms of, I suppose, morality or decency or basic honesty with regards to Boris Johnson. But this week he has proved himself to be both enormously incompetent and deeply dishonest. You'll remember that he's abolished that tax on meat that you're sick of paying and freed you of the responsibility of sorting your recycling into 7 different bins. And these weren't throwaway lines in an interview when he was on the back foot and flustered. They even put together Twitter releases. We're banning meat. And they got some fool on the Sun to stick it on the front page. Bless the little cotton socks. He's banning meat. Good old Rishi banning the meat tax. And you sit here some days and you sort of think, I mean, this must be what it feels like to be in the upside down, because there is no meat tax. But I know it's not really a proper newspaper, but it is. It looks like a newspaper. It walks like a newspaper. It quacks like a newspaper. It's the Sun. And that's almost a perfect little epitaph for Rupert Murdoch's tenure at the top of the empire, isn't it? On his last day in charge of the Sun, on the front page, it congratulated the Prime Minister on abolishing a meat tax that doesn't exist. That's it, actually, isn't it? That if you want to understand what Murdoch has done to the British media, without, of course, bringing actual death and misery into it and the appalling treatment of Hillsborough families and climate denial and all the rest of it. If you just want to look at the fundamental assault upon objective truth that has been normalised since Rupert Murdoch bought The Sun and started inveigling his way into the heart of the British media, still lying about the circumstances in which he bought The Times and the Sunday Times when he appeared before Leveson. if you want to actually nail it down, distill it to its very essence, you could do a lot worse than simply pointing out that on the day he supposedly stepped down from the head of his international media empire, the jewel in the crown of his UK assets printed a front page story congratulating the Prime Minister on abolishing a meat tax that doesn't actually exist. And if you ever study Murdoch, that would probably be a very good starting point. Actually, what am I talking about? It's a very good end point. Jeff's in Hackney. Jeff, what would you like to say?
James, you want a bit of breaking news?
Well, hang on. You've worried me now. Go on.
Someone's climbing the Leadenhall building in a T-shirt and shorts. I wonder if it's got anything to do with protests against climate change.
Oh, we shall see. Are there any banners present? Is there any support staff? Because sometimes it's just people who get a kick out of climbing buildings.
Could be.
Can you see any? Anyway, is there any? Can you see anything by way of protest or slogan?
No, miles away. My wife just texted me. She works there.
Oh, you live and learn. Carry on, mate. Thank you for that. I can't pay you, obviously. It's not the BBC, but we're very grateful for your input.
I'm one of the wealthy, James. I'm one of the wealthy.
Good.
About the issue.
Yes.
I think you were quite right in the first case when you first started talking about this issue. It's not about cars. This is a political, emotional issue, and that's why I think it's an important issue.
Yes.
It's important because it's a mindset changer. At a time when people want to feel that their sense of equilibrium is not being disturbed by the idea of having to do something about the environment.
Yeah.
At a time when they want to feel that people are saying it's okay, you're okay where you are. That's what Conservatives do. That's
so it's dog. Nav says it's dog whistle climate change denial in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And what it does is it shoves us a little bit away from thinking we have to do something, and it appeals to the people who do. And these things are incremental steps; they're quantum steps. But each quantum step, when we're edging so perilously closer to climate disaster, is vitally important, and that's why it's so cynical. That's why it's such an awful move. Oh, it won't matter, and you're quite right. Of course, objectively, numerically speaking,
but emotionally,
it probably
rhetorically,
won't make a difference,
philosophically, politically, yeah, okay. So it just feeds, and that's where it's a bit Brexity, because it feeds the appetites of people who almost willfully and performatively don't understand the facts.
Exactly. That's exactly the people, and they're not necessarily natural conservative voters.
No, of course. They're just people who don't think. I mean, it's a bit like Charlton Heston talking about his gun. They're people who don't want that. You're going to have to claw my car out of my cold dead hand, aren't you?
Yeah.
Jeff, thank you. I can't fault that analysis, but it leaves open that door of, you know, if it is the first step of many, then we've got a whopping great problem here. But if it's not, then the problem shrinks accordingly, commensurately. It's the idea that this is a softening up of the Tory party to embrace even more climate change denial, to go even more Tufton Street, to suck up even more to that. There's a sort of ERG style group within the Conservative Party that takes the same approach to net zero that the ERG took to European Union membership, i.e., you know, we are committed to blowing our own feet off while claiming that we're going to have 10 legs by tea time. And that's why you need to talk about it. So I just picked this up from Steve, because it's not Idiot's Corner, Steve, don't worry. But you said it's an obvious vote catcher for the next election, no debate necessary. But you couldn't be more wrong, Steve, because you have to talk about the fact that people are being misled and having their prejudices fed, and people are being deliberately lied to, or simply misled by people who are too arrogant and disconnected and detached and entitled to even care about the facts. You know, if I was a newspaper columnist, I could sit here today and say, I'm going to appeal to Brexiters and tell them that net zero is the new Brexit. And I have such contempt for my readers or my listeners or my viewers, I'm just going to carry on lying to them. Like I did about Brexit, like I did about Boris Johnson, like I did about Liz Truss. So of course it matters. They're tiny, tiny voices that can carry on telling the truth, mate. The idea that they should shut up because it's obvious what Sunak is playing at, oof, that way madness lies. 10:51 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. An excellent question from Mark. James, could you help me out? Do these people appearing all over the news for the Tories get paid? It's been bugging me for a while. Not by the Tories, Mark. Presenters obviously get paid by whatever platform they're working for, even if they are just shilling furiously and mercilessly for the Tory party. But the interesting element of that question is, I mean, it's so long since I did those sort of slots, those panel slots or newspaper review slots. Life really is too short. But there's sometimes a small fee. But if they're coming from a so-called think tank, i.e. a dark money lobby group that is shilling for fossil fuel interests in the case of this, and not required to say so, then their salary is paid by the anonymous donors. And obviously, until they disclose who their donors are, it's impossible to avoid the conclusion that doesn't include the vested interests, the businesses and the business people that profit from the status quo. So you see someone popping up from the Institute of Wizard Wheezes or the I don't know, the Vampires Alliance, then there may be a small fee for appearing on the programme, but their whole salary is paid by the secret lobbies, the vested interests. And we know that some of them, because in America, bizarrely and incredibly, things are slightly more transparent. We know that they receive money from climate denial organisations or climate denial adjacent organisations, from fossil fuel companies and from tobacco companies as well, actually, because these people are often to be found railing against tobacco or now vaping legislation as well. So that's really the cancer at the heart of British public discourse. And you can set your clock now. Someone from one of these organisations will be turning up within minutes on the BBC and sadly still on LBC as well. But I do my best. Alan is in Chesterfield. Alan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking the call.
Very well.
I do think it's a big deal, not the actual policy itself, but what it's trying to do.
Yeah.
This is a tactic to turn the next general election into a referendum.
Yeah.
He wants it to be between him and Keir. It's like a presidential-style election. And he's appealing to emotions. And he's going to do it with education. He's going to do it with HS2. He's going to do it with the unions. Over the next 10 weeks, we're going to get these announcements where he's saying, I am doing this.
Yeah. I think you're right. Actually, how does it work on education? What's he going to do on education? I understand he'll cast Starmer as being in the pocket of the unions, even though they've literally changed their rules to make that no longer true. But who cares as long as it gets a nice front page in the Daily Mail? How does it work on education?
What he'll do is he'll introduce this Backer-style laureate qualification, and even though there aren't enough teachers to teach it, the schools are falling down, and Keir Starmer will say, we can't do that because we can't teach it, we can't do it. He will say, I'm trying to improve your children's education. Oh, yeah, okay. He wants to keep it the same as it is.
That's the least obviously effective part of the plan, really, because it's quite nuanced and nebulous. But on the motoring stuff, that's when it's at its most bald, isn't it? Because he's simply because and this is quite hard to have this conversation, isn't it, without sounding, I don't know, condescending, God forbid. But this only works on people who don't understand what's going on.
Well, one of your previous callers earlier mentioned what he's trying to do is appeal to the not usually Tory voter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're coming for your car. They're coming for your car. It's a bit NRA, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
It's like Fox News telling its viewers that Barack Obama was going to turn up in person to remove their guns from their cellar.
It's pure emotion. They haven't got the policies and they haven't got the record to campaign on.
Well, that's very true.
So you're going to get people knocking on doors all over the country at the next general election, and your local MP will knock on your door and say, if you vote for Keir Starmer, things will change.
He will steal your car.
He will steal your car. Nothing will change.
Yeah, and that makes it a big deal, even though none of the facts support the feelings that they're trying to engender.
My local MP, when he goes, he's a Tory.
Yeah.
And when he knocks on doors, he talks. He's a good MP.
Right.
He generally talks about himself and the things he's tried to do for the area. Yeah.
Yes.
I'd be willing to bet a £5 this time round when he knocks on doors. He'll be talking about what Keir Starmer will do and what Rishi Sunak will do.
So it is, and that makes the role that the client media is playing in it, I mean, not even worth asking the question. It's obvious they're just doing what they always do, which is shilling for the Tories, even though this policy is the polar opposite of the one that they were shilling for when Boris Johnson is in charge.
Exactly that.
It's almost like they have no integrity at all, not to mention intelligence.
Oh, don't be ridiculous.
I know, I do apologise. That was grossly unfair of me. Thank goodness we didn't mention any names. And 30p Leenock, of course, has let the cat out of the bag by kind of admitting shortly before Rishi Sunak made him deputy chairman that they can't campaign on achievements and they can't campaign on Jeremy Corbyn because he's gone, so we're going to have to campaign on culture wars.
It's that expression, the same expression all the time. You know, when they show you who they are, believe them.
Believe them the first time. It's a bit late for that, but maybe believe them the 50th time, eh? That might be nice.
There's something along those lines, yeah.
Thank you, Alan. I mean, there it is. So Alan's gone on the same journey that I've gone on. Well, he may have been there at the beginning. So the facts do not constitute a big deal this week. Not bad to get there at 11 o'clock on the Friday. But the feelings that they're trying to engender are blindingly obvious. And then all roads lead back to exactly the same game plan they used in 2016. You've even got your net zero equivalent of the ERG. You've got your think tanks coming out of Tufton Street dedicated to climate change denial. It's all there. So why are they doing it? Answer, well, 52% we think that stupid people will vote for us. Beg your pardon, that's not fair. 52% we think that uninformed and deliberately misled and manipulated people will vote for us. Brexit! And 48% keep the fossil fuel lobby happy. And then they'll keep giving us money. Last word on this to Danny, who is in, how do I pronounce that? Earl's Colne.
Earl's Colne, that's correct.
Earl's Colne, very nice.
I agree. It's not a big deal in terms of changing the demographic or the numbers of vehicles, electric vehicles that are going to be sold, because they're going to be sold anyway. And increasingly, as people get more used to driving them and appreciate the benefits and the cheaper total cost of ownership because of lower electricity versus petrol prices, etc., people are going to get there anyway. But I do think it is a big deal politically. But your previous caller just stole exactly what I was going to say.
Don't worry, it's good. It's consensus.
They're trying to appeal to the voters who are sitting on the fence in an emotive way, but also in a rational way, that people who would not necessarily want to go so quickly down the road of ecological policies and want to hang back a bit and take a bit more time, less change, less risk to their perceived risk to their jobs and the economy, etc., by delaying a bit. And that's why he's trying to pitch it like that.
And that's why they need to be marshalling the feelings as opposed to sharing actually the facts, isn't it? It's well, and of course, I suppose if I were one of the highly paid characters in Downing Street charged with ignoring the facts and focusing on the feelings, and someone pointed out to me the polls aren't moving, boss, you'd just reply yet, wouldn't you?
Yes, you need to. Obviously, he's trying to create a separation, a clear space between the two parties, and appeal emotively to the people he can think he can win over. So he'll be delving through as many different policies that he can dig up as possible in order to make that change.
Never mind the facts, feel the feelings. And he was supposed to mark a change from what had gone before. I guess we keep a close eye on the polls coming in the next weeks, don't we, to see whether or not this has landed? Because it's based, as a lot of people have said, and as I'm sure you'd agree, it's based on that slightly unexpected result in Uxbridge. But there's a massive difference, I think, between the micro and the macro, as a colleague put it yesterday. You know, if this party are going to make you pay £12.50 to drive to Budgeons, versus at some unspecified point in the future, if you need to replace your car, you're only going to be able to replace it with a certain type of car. That doesn't work, but if they can persuade people that they're going to be forced to do stuff, or that there is some kind of gun being held to their head, metaphorically speaking, then maybe the needle will begin to nudge. And given what we've seen over the last few years, you'd be a braver man than me to bet against the appeal to the ill-informed factlessness triumphing over the feelings. You lost, get over it. How many times have you heard that phrase? It's a perfectly reasonable phrase, I think. So why is the front page of the Daily Mail today? Starmer lets cat out of bag on Brexit betrayal. You won, lads. Get over it. Seriously. It's bizarre. Who's most interested in keeping the Brexit ball bouncing? That's not the phone-in topic, but it almost could be, couldn't it? Because I don't know. I don't think it's our side of the argument, or rather my side of the argument. I hope I still have some people listening to the programme who are realising with every passing day what a terrible mistake they made back in 2016. But I don't hold you responsible. Contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned. But who wants to keep it animated? That's actually a really interesting question. that I wasn't intending to ask you. I hate it when that happens. Because Ed Davey, the leader of the Lib Dems, who I think is a much more interesting politician than he's given credit for, is, adamant today that the rejoining question is off the table. And of course, when we talk about this issue, which we don't do very often, although we might start again, the Lib Dems are often held up as the party of rejoin. Ed Davey, I'm afraid, has rather shot that fox today. That was the stance 4 years ago, but the annual conference will instead focus on issues like health and housing. The line that the BBC is using to report it is voters aren't talking about Brexit, says Lib Dem leader, and rejoining the European Union is off the table. He's right and wrong, isn't he? But at least he's trying to tell the truth, which automatically casts him in contrast to pretty much everybody in the government. But the voters aren't talking about Brexit, which sort of begs the question of why the Daily Mail have plastered it all over their front page. The answer is that they're lying. So Keir Starmer was filmed, I think, in Canada. Was it in Canada? I think it was in Canada, talking about divergence, and on some fairly specific areas, or certainly his intention was that in some fairly specific areas, it would be daft to diverge from European Union rules. For example, on food safety or on workers' rights. So this is where I really do find myself wishing that we could stop talking about it now, because I can't believe I have to say this stuff out loud. What the Daily Mail is apparently getting cross about today is Keir Starmer explaining that he would not be in favour of giving British workers fewer rights in the workplace than European Union workers. What Keir Starmer is saying is that he would not be in favour of feeding food to British people that is measurably inferior and more prone to infection or disease than food that is being fed to people in the European Union. What Keir Starmer is saying is that he would not be in favour of British people having fewer protections under health and safety legislation, for example, or building regulations, for example, than people living in the European Union. This is really where the conversation becomes quite heartbreaking now, because, as we've just established, these idiots will move on next to net zero without even a backward glance at the damage that they've already left in their wake. So because Keir Starmer said that he didn't want to diverge from EU rules, specifically in those areas, although quite what rules it is that people want to diverge from has never been made entirely clear, probably money laundering legislation or similar techniques that would allow the super rich to be even richer. But he doesn't want to diverge from EU rules that we helped make. In fact, until very, very recently, there's a very strong case for arguing that we were the driving force behind a lot of this legislation. And that is why it goes so bonkers now. That is why it all gets so bonkers. I don't think anybody, I've just realised the dangers of this topic sounding exactly like the last one. I don't think that anybody being encouraged to get angry about Keir Starmer being filmed saying he does not want to diverge from EU rules, I don't think anybody understands what they're supposed to be getting angry about. I did take calls back in the day from people who said they didn't care if their children couldn't get jobs. It would be worth leaving the European Union anyway. I did take the occasional call from people who were proud of the fact that they were smashing themselves over the head with a frying pan. And they spoke in good faith, and I found it a curious mixture of funny and tragic, or tragicomic, I think is the correct turn of phrase. But the evolution of this conversation now into this space strikes me as absolutely laughable. I got sent a photograph this morning by a pal of mine who is a shopkeeper, a grocer, and he gets sent a lot of cheese. That is a disgrace. He gets sent a lot of cheese from the European Union, and the confusion now is such that no one's entirely sure what they're supposed to be doing. So they err upon the side of caution, and he now receives his cheese consignment from the continent with every single piece of cheese in a different box, and therefore needing a different piece of paperwork. Previously, there was no paperwork to speak of, and all the cheese came in one box. Just think about that for a minute. That is what divergence is. So the Daily Mail, and I imagine that various Tory politicians will probably jump on this bandwagon a little later as well, if they haven't already. The Daily Mail wants to diverge more. In fact, I think I've heard Farage say it. I think I've heard him say the words out loud. And he is the patron saint of using words that he doesn't know the meaning of. Okay? For example, sovereignty and control. But I think we haven't diverged enough. From what? Because in this instance, it is diverging from food safety legislation, health and safety legislation, workers' rights legislation, and sundry other measures that have been put in place through law that are designed to protect people from profiteering or incompetence or exploitation. I find it actually, even after all these years of discussing it, I find it staggering that we're still in this space. I find it absolutely unbelievable that the Daily Mail is still telling its readers that it would be a good thing for them to have fewer protections in the workplace, or lower standards of food, or more red tape on their business. It's incredible, right? I mean, truly incredible. And yet, at the same time, I think Ed Davey is right, the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey is right. That's interesting, isn't it? Is this the first general election where the incumbent of the three main parties, the only leader without a knighthood is the incumbent Prime Minister? It probably is. That's more of a pub quiz question than a mystery hour question, I think. But I think it will be the first. Well, no, because back in the day, everyone had a knighthood, didn't they? It was like the Tory party under Boris Johnson. But it's certainly the one. It's the first one I can remember where the only major party leader, English major party leader without a knighthood going into a general election is the one that's actually the Prime Minister. 11 minutes after 11. I do think sometimes you could call it the Dorries effect. Imagine being a Tory who hasn't got a gong after Boris Johnson and Liz Truss have finished. It'd be almost like a Punch cartoon. It's more of a mark of honour, I think, to be a Tory without a gong in the current climate than it would be to be one with one. Quite remarkable. But this idea of divergence, I've been meaning to talk about it for a while, and I'm still not entirely sure what the correct question is. But what does it mean? I'm looking at this picture of 50 cardboard boxes. And don't forget, we haven't got 7 bins to recycle them in anymore. That got banned yesterday by Rishi Sunak. I mean, what is it that these people are frightened of? Is that the way to do this topic? Because I don't think you're going to ring me and tell me why you hate healthy food or workplace protections or why you love red tape, are you? So can we do that, or is that too meta? Is it niche, actually? It's a combination of niche and meta, which is a bit of a contradiction. When the Daily Mail tells its readers that Keir Starmer is betraying them by expressing a desire to keep our standards at least as high as the European Union, there is nothing at all, of course, to stop us going higher. What are they telling their readers to be cross about? What are they telling their readers to be frightened of? It's quite bizarre, isn't it? Language is crucial here, James. I stated exactly what you've just said, Rhys Starmer's statements about divergence in conversation with a Brexiteer last night. When I substituted the word divergence for dilute, they had a light bulb moment. Sometimes it is that simple. Now that's really interesting, isn't it? Labour's mask slipped last night after Keir Starmer was filmed saying he did not want to diverge from EU rules. Now translate that into Labour's mask slipped last night after Keir Starmer was filmed saying he did not want to dilute legislation designed to protect British people from rancid food, exploitative employers, or dangerous buildings. I don't know what the question is, and it's only 11:14, so I've got ages to make my mind up. But I think it is something like, what are we supposed to be diverging from? I know what you're thinking. We should probably have established this in 2016, but we did. We tried. We pointed out that all of the stuff they told us that we'd be better off without, we would be better off with. So if you're importing stuff now, it is harder. If you want to tour in Europe, it is harder. Why would you diverge more? This is the deal that David Frost negotiated. A separate box for every bit of cheese coming into the country, with separate paperwork for every box, when previously the whole lot could come in on one pallet. It's absolute madness. And Keir Starmer is filmed saying effectively, well, we're big believers in breathing. We don't want to dilute the quality of the air that the British people are breathing. And the Daily Mail thinks that's a scandalous betrayal of Brexit. What is it? I don't think, you see, this is the mad bit now. This is the bit that breaks my heart. Is that even if you think I'm the enemy, you can't tell me what you want to diverge from. And yet you've staked everything on this. You can't tell me what protections you want to dilute, what standards you want to diminish, what health and safety legislation you want to remove. You can't tell me in what circumstances you want to be less safe, or eating dirtier food, or living in more dangerous buildings. You can't tell me that, can you? So how can it possibly be controversial for a British political leader to recognise the fact that the European Union legislation we helped to frame is far from perfect, but it's a great starting point for us post-Brexit. Nothing to stop us going higher, as indeed Johnson did with the electric car legislation, which Rishi Sunak undid earlier this week. There's nothing to stop us going further than the European Union, but why would we want to go less far? I'd love you to phone me on this. I've got a horrible feeling I might need to frame a different question, but I don't want to. I really want to examine what you understand divergence to mean in this context, 0345 6060 973, and also what you think they mean. And we don't need to talk about Uncle Stuart's Facebook page. We can just talk about the Daily Mail. I don't know who is in charge these days. The editor is a bloke called Ted Verity, but Paul Dacre still seems, or at least the spirit of Paul Dacre, who's the editor-in-chief and was supposed to be both put in the House of Lords and in charge of Ofcom by Boris Johnson, but both of those failed. No wonder he's so bitter. But the idea that Brexit needs to be revivified, it needs to be resurrected, because Keir Starmer has expressed a fairly obvious commitment to the most basic standards that we already abide by. What does the word... So, all right, I don't like doing this because, no one likes skid marks, do they? However stubborn they may be. But Nigel Farage talks about we haven't diverged enough. I can't ask you what you think he means because the man's relationship with honesty is so ridiculous. But someone who uses the word diverge as a positive, we need to diverge more. What are they talking about? And does this make Ed Davey... I'm in that mood now. I didn't think I was going to be. I could talk till 12 o'clock. Does this make Ed Davey wrong? So you remember Steve's message in the last hour. It wasn't Idiot's Corner. Steve said there's no point having this debate. It's obvious what's going on. To which my response is, it's because it's obvious what's going on that we have to keep talking about it. And that is a belief I'd take to the grave, actually. You can't be silent when they're gulling you, when they're conning you. However lonely you are, there is truth, wrote George Orwell, and there is untruth. And if you can hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. And the truth is that there are only two ways of diverging from European Union rules, if you want to call them that. You can either have worse rules or you can have better rules. And there is absolutely nothing stopping us from having better rules. Why would anyone want worse rules? That's your question. 0345 6060 973. And also, bring a bit of personal, professional perspective to this. In your world, what would divergence mean? And it has to involve going lower than where we currently are. So you, for example, you might be a manufacturer of bungee jump cords. And at the moment you have to abide by certain rules regarding how strong your bungee jump cords have to be. What would divergence look like in your world? I think I can imagine what it might. So you had to, if you were abiding by less strict rules on your bungee jump cords, what would happen to your customers? Do you see what I mean? That's a great example, actually, of how mad it is to complain about diluting health and safety legislation, diluting food safety legislation, diluting building regulations. So, not for the first time. It's taken a lot longer than I was expecting this introduction. Not for the first time. What do you think the Daily Mail are playing at? And Nigel Farage and the rest of them, because they're all much of a muchness now. There was a time when the Daily Mail looked down its nose at Nigel Farage, but those days are behind us. when a bank tells him that he's not allowed to bank with the posh people anymore because he's not rich enough, they all behave as if it's national news. So just talk to me about the word diverge. There you go. What does it actually mean, and what do these idiots think it means? 0345 6060 973. I grant you, I could have got there in fewer than 20 minutes. When we see the word diverge now in the context of Brexit, let cat out off bag on Brexit betrayal. Diverge from what? What does the word diverge actually mean? And what do these clowns... Well, no. So we'll talk about what the word diverge actually means, and then we'll translate it into gammonish. All right? So what does it mean in gammon? 0345 6060 973. It is 11:22, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The question is divergence. It's going to be the watchword, I think, in the context of Brexit conversations. And I want to know what you think it means, and then I want to know what you think they think it means, i.e. the people who think we should be diverging more, okay? Let's start with Tim, who's in East Finchley. Tim, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I just want to burst a little bubble, which is that we may end up diverging by default.
We already are, aren't we, on some fronts? Because I think on poisons, there's some poisons that have been outlawed by the EU, but we're still using them.
Yeah, and my industry, there's an EU directive being currently talked about changing. So then what happens? You know, we end up diverging because they move forward and maybe we don't.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I don't know if you've burst a bubble or if you've just introduced a new wrinkle to what we're looking at, because I didn't even mention that story earlier this week. I can't remember the full details of it, but can you? It was a story about pesticides, perhaps, that are no longer allowed to be used in the EU, but UK farmers still can use them, which means...
Oh, was it neonicotinoids?
Yeah, it may have been, although there was more to it than that. There were more than one substance. And, of course, this goes on quietly, doesn't it? No one's going to know unless you're in the actual sector that you're describing. No, the average Joe isn't going to know that we are now abiding by less stringent regulations and protections than we would have been if we were still in the European Union.
No, and I actually made a ranty Facebook post about the Daily Mail front page before you brought it up.
Oh, did you?
Because the other facet to this is that the government already said over the summer recess that the UK CE mark won't really be needed anymore because we're going to accept the CE mark after all.
Yes.
So that means lots of regulations are actually going to be not diverging if they actually get around to implementing this properly. So far it's actually...
do you know what? You're absolutely right. So the government have done it as a policy proposal. Keir Starmer has said it out loud.
Shouting about it,
and the Daily Mail are attacking Keir Starmer for saying it out loud. Well, the bloke in charge has said, well, we'll be doing that as well.
Yes.
It's Go on.
Unless we diverge by accident because the EU goes and makes new regulations which we don't follow, and then we suddenly might need that mark after all.
And we won't be able to sell into the European Union unless we're abiding by the new rules that they've introduced.
Yeah.
So if you're in the business of exporting or manufacturing. So why then? I mean, I thought that text distinguishing between diverge and dilute was quite powerful. Language is really important, and I don't want this to turn into a repeat of the last hour when we were talking about people who don't really understand things being encouraged to get very angry and or frightened about the things they don't really understand. But why does the Daily Mail think that diverge is such a loaded word? Why do they think that if they tell their readers that Keir Starmer isn't going to diverge, even as Rishi Sunak proposes policies that would enshrine in law the inability to diverge, why do they think it's such an effective tactic?
I think it's just what the last way of trying to describe Brexit benefits, or one of the last ways, like so-called Brexit benefits. We can diverge. Well, yeah, great, but what does that actually do to help industry? Nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, here it is. I found it. Geographical magazine have printed this. The 2016 Brexit vote has led to many changes in the way the UK functions and how it interacts with its closest neighbours. Some of these impacts, such as immigration and trade, are well known, but there are some post-Brexit changes that the majority of us are not aware of. The types of pesticides and chemicals authorised to be used in the UK since Brexit fall into this category. And the headline of the story is UK fails to ban 36 pesticides, including 13 classed as highly hazardous. That is what not diverging. No, that is what diverging looks like, right?
Yeah, and of course it was always said during the Brexit debate that there was nothing before Brexit that stopped us from going higher. I think you said this yourself.
I did.
We can always do more. We could never do less.
That's the point. So there it is. This is so in answer to the question of what does diverge mean in your world. 36 pesticides, including 13 classed as highly hazardous, have been banned in the European Union since 2016, but they're still allowed here. So that is it. You want your gammon coated in poisonous pesticides, highly hazardous poisonous pesticides. That's what freedom tastes like. Poisonous gammon. Thank you, Tim. Alan's in Poole. Alan, what would you like to say?
Good morning, Jim. Well, it's James. So it seems to me that obviously what our Tufton Street buddies that want us to do is the British public to be worse off, however that may mean from the point of view of health or safety.
So divergence would mean that I'm going to lower standards, but as a manufacturer, I'm going to make more money because it costs money to protect my customers.
What they'd have to do if they want to, because I worked in heavy industry all my life, if they're going to have to make it to the European standard, but the workers will not necessarily enjoy European workers' standards of health and safety.
So if we knit your call with the last call, we're not going to have our own new kite mark. We're still going to have to abide by European Union regulations on what is manufactured, but the places in which the manufacturing occurs, the workers are going to have fewer protections and fewer rights than they would if they were in France.
Because that's the only way they perceive that they can compete is by cheapening the workforce.
Or increasing the money. So there'll be more red tape on what they're exporting. They'll be exporting it into a market whose rules we are following. But divergence means that the British workers, the British workforce, won't enjoy the protections that their European counterparts enjoy.
Absolutely. So
while also eating food that's less healthy than the food that their European counterparts enjoy.
Correct. So years ago, I worked in the foundry all my life. We'd be up against Egyptian opposition back 40 years ago,
yes.
And they'd be with bare feet.
Yeah.
And of course, or in India, you look on YouTube, you can see foundries in India, and you can see what's going on.
That's
I mean, one of the things that I always say is this. The one thing that when I say to people, what's the most important thing in your life? And they say family, obviously their wives and what. But I tell you, the most important thing in your life, James, is the brakes on your car. And whether people like it or not, the brakes on your car are all made to EU Standard 41, and they will always be made to EU Standard 41. Well, that was a relevant documentation
when
when I was working 15 years ago, whatever it is now, because that's what it'll have to be. Because if it's not, there will be insurance claims against them. So, in my view, what it is, they have to compete with regulations that are in place, but they will try and cheapen the operation to do it.
I think that is one of the calls I'm going to remember. But I am just going to turn it into a Daily Mail story, Alan, with your permission.
You do what you like.
Are you ready? Alan's mask slipped last call after he was recorded saying that he did not want to diverge from EU rules. That's what you literally just said with regard to brake pads. I don't want to diverge from EU rules. But your mask slipped. I hope you realise that. And somehow, in the land of the Daily Mail, that makes you the problem. What do we want? Less safe cars. What do we want? Rubbish brake pads. When do we want them? Now. It is. Feel free to ring in. Tell Alan that he's got this wrong. Tell me that I've got this wrong. Because what is it that you want to diverge from? Because Keir Starmer has made it pretty clear that it is about standards, protections, health and safety legislation, food. And we already live in a country, and I bet you didn't know this either. Weirdly, I bet the media outlets telling you to get really excited about small boats and net zero, I bet they didn't tell you that we have now got 36 more pesticides in use in this country, including 13 classed as highly hazardous, than we would have if we'd stayed in the European Union. What did you vote for? Sovereignty or poison? Because you got one and you haven't really got the other. I just double-checked that because you know how often I pinch myself on this programme. It's true. It was reported in August of last year that the United Kingdom is going to retain the EU's product safety mark indefinitely. I'm just going to have a conflab with some colleagues. Can we just check on this, Jake? Just see if you can find if the Daily Mail ever reported it. The UK will retain, so August the 1st it was reported, after spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds, upon developing a new safety mark that would be specific to the UK and mean that we could jettison the Conformité Européenne mark, which is used across the bloc to certify that a wide range of items, from electrical goods and construction materials to fireworks and toys, meet safety standards. We're not doing it. We're sticking with the European mark, and we are not building our own or creating our own. And this is as a consequence of government coming under enormous pressure from industry, i.e. the people making the stuff like the electrical goods and the construction materials and the fireworks and the toys. So the UKCA, or the UK Conformity Assessed Mark for goods sold in Great Britain from the end of 2024 has been nixed. It is expired. It is an X safety mark. They did what they always do with the Brexit benefits. They kept postponing them because introducing them was going to be so awful. And so that is the UK. This is actually quite important. I know we spend a lot of time taking the mickey out of the Mail, but, and I know it's like shooting fish in a barrel, but they still exert influence and much of the government still dances to their tune. So this is from August of this year, which is last month, right? That's not an opinion, that's counting. Last month, the news was sort of snuck out that after spending a significant sum of money on developing a UK-specific safety mark, which had already been postponed on several occasions, because all the stuff, and this is what you call the rule of Rees-Mogg, all the stuff that they told you was going to be better is so bad that they have to keep postponing it. That was actually announced, if you like, last month. And that deliberately and categorically involves the UK government refusing to diverge from European Union rules. That is literally law. That is literally a failure, a reluctance, a refusal to introduce legislation that would have seen us diverge from EU legislation. It would have given us our own UK safety mark.